my father-in-law staying with us, and so he's a super handyman. He's done construction for like 25 years or something like that,
Oh,
and
mhm.
I don't know anything about it. He's from Mexico, and we fixed
Ooh.
his papers and stuff like that. He was deported. He was gone for 14 years.
Oh,
Destroyed his family. Destroyed his life, and we're just trying to
of
help
course
him
it did.
rebuild.
Hmm.
And but anyways, long story short, he's showing me how to work a hammer, how to work a saw, how to
Oh, nice.
we just put in new floors. Now we're putting in the moldings. We're gonna paint. We're gonna redo two of the bathrooms. All stuff that's
That's awesome.
completely out of my range. So
Well, now you have a fallback position,
right. I mean,
or maybe you've done some
I've always felt
construction.
insecure of just being a really good writer. Like when
Yeah.
you're a kid, they tell you, oh, if you're just really smart, you'll be fine. And then, sometime when you become an adult, you realize, oh, well, being smart actually doesn't cut it. You kind of have
And
to have,
no, it doesn't put food on the table.
yeah.
There are a lot of smart people sitting in ICE detention right now.
Right. I think about that
An
all the
awful lot
time.
of people.
As an American,
Yeah.
being, we're born in America. We're just so I've said this on the past episodes. We're just so lucky to be born in this country. Like, because
Mhm.
I couldn't be doing this podcast. You couldn't write books. You couldn't direct documentaries. I mean, you could, but
Mhm.
if you were in Honduras,
Yeah.
the chances of you directing a documentary are slim to none, right? But
Right. Right.
anyways, first I want to welcome you to the podcast. I mean, we've been
Thank
Facebook friends for
you.
a while. I don't know. We'll get into that how we became Facebook friends, but introduce yourself to everybody. Tell everybody what you do.
So, my name is Ellin Jimmerson. I am I am a filmmaker slash advocate, particularly for undocumented people, but for laboring people, working people generally, more generally. Um, I'm a historian by education. I have a doctorate in U.S. 20th century U.S. cultural and intellectual history, and some people know me because I officiated at the first legal same-sex wedding by a Baptist minister in the country, as far as we know. I don't know how far that extends, but anyway, so
Those are things I didn't
and I
know
write,
anything
I
about you.
write.
I didn't know you were a filmmaker. I didn't know you had officiated the first Southern Baptist. You were the first Southern Baptist minister to administer same-sex marriage. The interesting thing about that, the more you pull on a string, the more interesting it gets. They were black lesbians from Birmingham.
Yeah,
That's even
yeah, I
that's even
know.
crazier. Um, and
Well, that story went like all around the world. I mean, people in Italy read about
I
that.
must have seen the photo and didn't know you at the time.
Didn't know, yeah. So, I mean, I think we had it all. I was a Baptist minister. I am a Baptist minister. The couple were African Americans out of Birmingham. We're all from Alabama. That also was a block, a box to tick. And I had on this gorgeous rainbow colored scarf, and
Yeah, I
I
saw the
really
photo.
think it was a scar sort of brought it home.
Yeah. No, I think you said in one of the, I think on your website, you're like, yeah, the journalists had a field day with that image,
Yeah.
they loved it. Um, I don't know. So where do you, I guess we'll start with, you sent me, well, how did we become Facebook friends? I mean, I guess I share a lot and you must have found me somehow. Um,
Well, I had sent a piece to Latino Rebels.
oh, there you go. And I
It
edited
was,
it.
and you edited it, and I probably sent you a Facebook friend request, but it may have been the other way around. But
Yeah.
I was really interested in, I really appreciated how you edited it, and so that was it was so cool. I'm still so proud of that.
Yeah.
That Latino Rebels piece is right up there with the second cooler in terms of things I've done that I'm proud of.
Yeah. I mean,
But I still don't hear people talking about that. I don't know if you remember, but it had to do with, I think the title was Time to Break Silence, and it had to do with Hillary Clinton's uh, implication in the illegal coup d'etat in Honduras, and the fact that Berta Cáceres specifically pointed to her as being so responsible for the downward spiral into poverty that Honduras was being pulled out of by Manuel Zelaya, and also persecution of LGBT people. Femicide became, just such an issue. So anyway, I'm very proud that I put that together and that Latino Rebels published it.
I mean, we were proud to. I mean, as an editor, even to this day, but it started at Latino Rebels, maybe started before when I was at Osama. It's always been my thing that, if you write well and you're arguing honestly and earnestly, then I will publish it, even if I disagree with it, Yeah, if you're writing well and you're bringing facts and you're bringing good arguments, I'm going to publish it because it's just interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, and nobody's talking about it. You're talking to a writer who's written so many things over the years, and the only thing that people remember is the Latinx thing. Gore Vidal has that famous thing about the United States of amnesia, and it's so true now, where people forget things that happened a few months ago. It's crazy, fast, new, the latest thing.
Yeah. Last week we were all involved in taking up sides over the movie Cuties, or Mignon, as its original title was. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, we were just going to watch it where it's some girls in Latin America or something. They want to get into dancing, but they were saying that it sexualizes children.
Well, and it doesn't. I mean, anybody who's had
of course it doesn't.
I mean, it's a Senegalese. It's the story of the filmmaker who is a Senegalese refugee, or her parents were in France. So they're all trying to deal with coming of age. They're trying to deal with social media and what can happen to you and there was no nudity. There were no sexual, really. So last week we were all like, it's the end of women's rights. This has got to stop. I won't even watch the movie. Now we've moved on and we're discussing Ruth Bader Ginsburg and whether we as Americans can actually critique her record in office so close to her death. So now,
what do you think about that? She was one of my heroes, really. If you just look at her personally, the character that she had to have to become what she became. Wasn't she like one of the first or only person in her law class? I think she was top of her class, or it's either her or Judge Judy, one of those, who was the only girl in her female law class and graduated top of her class. But I was actually mad at her because I thought she should have retired before 2016.
Yeah.
I know she thought that she can keep going, and her mind was still there, but the body goes before the mind does. If we're lucky.
Yeah, one of the things my husband's a lawyer, and we've talked about this, is that there are very few lawyers at 87 who can think as quickly, as they could when they were 27 or 37.
Right.
And the fact is, a lot of what the justices do is done for them by their clerks. So she was all justices are somewhat dependent on their clerks, but I would think when you get into your 80s and you've had your fourth round with cancer, that a lot of that was not actually Ginsburg as a justice. It was much more her clerks, I would think. And I don't say that. And so Friday, when she died, I posted it on Facebook. And at that point, I was kind of like, this is really not a good thing, because of the women's issues. And she was not somebody I had followed closely. It's all I can do to keep up with immigration and that kind of thing. And then the first complaint somebody said was, well, she should have resigned in 2009. And that was something that I probably knew at one time, but I had forgotten. But that's a legitimate complaint. We wouldn't be in this situation had she resigned in 2009 and Obama been able to replace her.
Right.
And then I started hearing from Native Americans. This is all on Facebook, which is such a great place for getting varying opinions and varying takes on things. And
Right.
so,
If you can learn not to take things at face value and just as
yeah,
what's being
yeah,
said.
and
Yeah.
just and how other people are seeing things.
Right.
So, so then I heard from Native Americans that, and the thing about Ginsburg is she's being held up as this defender of women's bodily autonomy. So once you've positioned her in that respect, then you are morally bound when
Yeah.
somebody challenges you and says, you, Ellin, being white and well-to-do and middle class, upper middle class, you may have protected your bodily rights, but she didn't protect the bodily rights of Native Americans generally, or Native American women specifically. She was involved in a decision with the Onondaga, maybe the Oneidas, and she subverted their traditional matrilineal lines of inheritance, and also, the sovereignty to their land. And she based it on the doctrine of discovery, the foundational argument, the foundational document that said that Europeans, because they were Christians, were entitled to all the lands of the Americas and entitled to displace or even commit genocide against indigenous people. This is significant. This is what Janine Áñez, who is not going to run again, but took over in Bolivia, Evo Morales's seat. She's this Christian fascist. And basically what we're talking about is the doctrine of discovery. And then I heard from an African-American woman who teaches research and also teaches journalism at two historically Black colleges and universities, Howard University and another one, Macon. And, she was just like, this makes no sense from the perspective of African-American women. This woman who in the Supreme Court protected the carceral state, mass incarceration. And someone else said she also signed off on fast tracking deportation. So deportation, as we've seen with the Cameroonian woman in the ICE detention center in Georgia.
Tell us about that. I mean, I don't really follow the news that closely anymore, but.
Okay, well, there are a couple of ICE detention centers in the state of Georgia. And there has been a report, an African-American nurse who had worked in that facility, I think for about 10 years, told a reporter, and this appeared in The Intercept and other places, that there were women there. She had come into contact with this Cameroonian woman who said she was sent to the doctor, the ICE doctor, for some complaint, and she came out with a hysterectomy, not having known, not having consented. And so then the nurse said she then tried to verify that with other women who have been there. And they said, yes, they went in for the flu. They didn't understand what was being asked of them. They didn't understand what they were signing. But there's this, this doctor in there who the reports are, which may or may not be true. But we can all see that in that situation, that kind of thing can be true.
Right. I mean, it's happened in Puerto Rico. It's happened in Central America,
yeah,
right? With the sterilization.
Yeah.
I mean, the government just got finished apologizing for sterilizing. What was it, in El Salvador or somewhere like that, where they?
Well, it's happened. It's happened
Puerto
to
Rico in the 50s. They sterilized like 50% of Puerto Rican women without them knowing.
Yeah. So, and this was one of my complaints too with DACA, was that you've got middle class, mostly white people encouraging teenagers to sign up without themselves understanding what they're actually doing. Now, not the question of whether a grown man or a grown woman who understands, should sign up for a DACA deferment if they're willing to take that risk.
Right.
But you take somebody who's 16, whose parents don't speak English, who don't understand the system, and you've got an advocate that they trust telling you that this is a good way to get a job or to be able to go to school legally and not get deported, when if you read the memo itself, it never said that.
No.
It never said that. And so you've got, in both these situations, you've got very vulnerable populations that they just automatically trust you. If you're a doctor and you're sick, you're gonna trust and agree to anything.
Right.
You don't have people who in ICE detention center speaks, an indigenous Central American language.
And a lot of them are indigenous. I mean, a lot of people think that they speak Spanish, but they're actually from like Chiapas or Oaxaca, where they speak, languages that are unknown to most Mexicans,
Right, right. I mean, I know when I interviewed, there's a man in the second cooler who breaks down crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The guy who traveled across Mexico, right?
Yeah. And he...
you only see his eyes.
Yes,
I love that shot.
Yeah. And we had a difficult time communicating with... He learned Spanish in Alabama. I mean...
Man, if any conservative Republicans, nativists are hearing that, they're going to be so pissed.
Yeah. So, I mean, and so the man who was interpreting for me, of course, I couldn't understand a word.
Right.
Because of his accent. Sometimes I can follow people, whose accents are sort of...
But he's indigenous, speaking with Spanish with an indigenous accent.
Yeah. So the man who was interpreting was from Puerto Rico. And he would have to have the man say it 2 or 3 times. And, I found when I was translating it, and I had help, but I was tracking some of it once I knew the story.
Yeah.
And he was, he had a non-Western way of telling a story. He would tell it in loops and circle back and come back. And he referred to his niece as his niece, and then she was the girl. And I'm like, I just had to spend a long time to get, the thread of that story enough so that I could just interpret it.
No, it's my wife's Mexican. She was born in Mexico, and she came here when she was 2, so she speaks English perfectly, right? But she still constructs her English from the Spanish perspective. Yeah. And as a writer, I'm an English native speaker. As a writer, it's such a wealth of like just seeing the language that I've been using my whole life from a different angle, because she'll construct. I can't even give you an example because she'll construct a sentence so weird that I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. It works, but it's just not how we construct it.
And the thought process is different.
Right. Well, yeah, the way you speak is the way you think, right? It's a mirror to how you think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, getting back to the documentary, I mean, you send me this link and you're like, can you write a review for it? I didn't even know you had written a documentary.
Really?
No, or direct one. No, I did not at all. You were just a Facebook friend that, you and I are like-minded and we agree on a lot of things. So that's enough for me, and so, and to be honest, when you sent it to me, so a lot of people send me books and stuff like that. And I'm always like, oh no. Let's see, here we go.
How am I going to say something nice? Because I know I'm going to hate it.
And I get a lot of requests for reviews. And what I do is, if I don't like something, I just don't review it, because there's no point in writing a bad review, period. And even if it's for a friend or anybody, but just no point. Why are you going to spend time saying why you hate something? But I loved it. I loved it from the beginning because you talk about, about what's very rarely discussed, and if it's discussed, it's touched lightly as if it's just coincidental, about how, what's happening with the immigration crisis is American made, and it's fueled by American demand for cheap labor and cheap goods. And one of the most interesting things, I mean, you touch on a lot of things, you cover a lot, you do a great job of covering a lot of ground, but not losing the viewer and having it all tie together. And
Thank you.
obviously,
Thanks so much for that.
I call them Estevez, so now I can't. Martin Sheen, I call them Estevez. Um, Martin Sheen, is the narrator, so obviously, it's just such a nice journey through the topic, right? But no, the one thing you say is that the whole thing that, and you hear it all the time, and I've been guilty of saying it, repeating it, because it's such a nice thing to say. Immigrants take the jobs that Americans don't want. No immigrant steals a job, right? Nobody immigrants stealing a job. There's no such thing as stealing a job. They're just up for it, and they're willing to do it. But what the documentary points out is that no, I mean, you can't bash Americans for not wanting those jobs, because the illegal immigration causes, that's encouraged by the system for this reason, makes it so that those laborers don't have rights, and so they're working in harsh conditions for little pay, for in conditions that nobody should have to work in, illegal
Nobody
or
should have
not.
to work like that.
So that
Yeah.
an American doesn't want to take those jobs is no slight against an American. And I thought that
Right.
was so interesting, because you never hear that stated explicitly like that.
Yeah. And that's, there's so many of those talking points among advocates that have no or little basis in, I mean, you might find a factual point, but it misses the bigger point. And the other
Right.
thing that I tried to point out with the guest worker program is that, I mean, we're talking about employers on the Gulf Coast in the years following Katrina, like 2 years after Katrina, who say they cannot find people in the Black Belt of Alabama, which is 90% African American and like the fifth poorest county in the country consistently, who doesn't want to learn to be a welder or who doesn't want to shuck oysters.
Yeah.
Really? People who have not been able to go back to their homes in New Orleans,
Yeah.
Gulfport, Mississippi. This just on its face is a lie. It's on its face. And then, I go down there and so many advocates have been saying, how wonderful these employers were. They loved their brown brothers and all of this. And so I go down and I get an interview with the person in charge of Master Marine in Bayou La Batterie. And these people, these advocates, some of whom are lawyers, don't know to investigate a couple of the claims. And so I get on the internet, and in 30 minutes, I've discovered that Master Marine is owned by Sun Myung Moon and the Unification Church, as is almost everything in Bayou La Batterie. And his personal worth is $990 million.
Yeah.
And you're saying you can't afford?
Yeah. Because Master Marine poses itself as an American country, and we're just this little mom and pop.
Yeah. We operate close to the line.
Yeah.
If anybody's idled, we'll go under. Baloney. Come on. Yeah. And when I challenged that man on that, he lunged at me. He literally lunged at me and my cinematographer.
Is that the guy who said, can I talk to you about this off camera?
Yeah. Yeah. and then see, I said, why? And he lunged at me. Well, I took that out, it just, it turned into about me and him, and,
Yeah.
But clearly you didn't want me talking about that.
Just talking about that immigration, immigrants take the jobs that Americans don't want. I mean, there's also more and more, that's aimed towards millennials, right?
Mm-hmm.
Millennial, Americans used to be, I'll speak for men, we used to be welders, and there's like an emasculation of millennial men, because we don't do the jobs that our fathers and grandfathers used to do. We don't want to. But it's the same token, right? Those jobs used to provide a middle class living. Yeah. You can have a house and you can send your kids to college being a welder.
Yeah.
Now you can't. You can barely feed yourself.
No. And that has so much to do with NAFTA and CAFTA.
Yeah.
All the free trade agreements, which,
The documentary does a great job too of really explaining how what NAFTA did to Mexico and to Central America and why they're coming here. Like why? Because you see this,
and
you're
what,
seeing the
how,
surge in the recent decades, right? And so that
yeah.
it's really NAFTA and CAFTA, which is the same thing, but
Well,
NAFTA.
and what I tried to point out too is that CAFTA had that same, those free trade agreements also had their impact here. And so I had to boil it down and turn it into a shorthand and used Fort Payne, Alabama, which was very handy because I could get there to film, and also because it was the representative there who cast the deciding vote
Yeah.
after Bush. I don't think I got into all of that. I had to take it out. But Robert Adderholt, George Bush had invited him to the White House. They were stuck half and half, the votes, 50-50. And so he invites Robert Adderholt up there. And Robert Adderholt, of course, Fort Payne prided itself on being the sock capital of the world at that time. It
The
was
what
a
capital?
sock.
Which is what?
Socks like you put on your feet.
I thought you were saying sock. I'm like, oh,
No.
the socks. The sock capital of the United States?
The sock capital. Yeah, I even have a little sign in the movie. But they, back in the day, 20 years ago or 30, if you pulled out your T-shirt, the label, it would say, well, now I've forgotten them, but it would have Alabama footwear, for example, would be the label. Now, I bet the T-shirt you've got on says Gildan. So Gildan comes in and shuts down. Yeah, I know. It's like everybody.
First time wearing the shirt, and I just pulled the tags off. So I think it did say Gildan.
And it says immigrant made.
Immigrant made. Yeah, this is from a company that supports food vendors.
Yeah, well, and I mean everybody does this. It's just it's not one of those things you think about.
Yeah.
But it devastated the sock industry, the textile industry. I should call it the textile industry.
Yeah.
CAFTA did. It just shut it down, and people, my husband, I said he was a lawyer, had a client years ago. He specializes in aviation now, but years ago when he was first getting started, he had a man come to him who had been put out of business. He had started this textile business in his basement and had built it up, and he was so proud of it. And he didn't know what had hit him. He did not understand the forces. He didn't understand how CAFTA had affected him. He just knew he couldn't hold on to his factory anymore.
And he probably felt, as a lot of business owners do and did, inadequate. Like it's something I'm doing. How come, maybe my grandfather had or my grandmother had their own business. How come I can't? And you don't understand that it's a global forces now that your grandfathers didn't have to deal with.
And so I know people have questioned me talking about the impact of NAFTA on Mexicans, and they'll go to a Mexican that they know somehow and ask them, what did NAFTA have to do? And they're like, I don't know. I've never heard of NAFTA. But that's not unusual.
It's not unusual. No, I mean,
it's like we don't understand how we got to in this fix that we're now in the United States. I mean, I'm a historian and I can pull out certain pieces, but I can't pull out the whole, I can't put it all together.
And thinking about it, and you as a Southerner, maybe you can tell me, and as a historian, what American capital, American businesses are trying to do to Latin America and the developing world is what they were doing to the South for the longest time.
Oh, and they're still doing it.
Right. But now they're taking away those jobs that used to be made in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia. Now, what does the South have now?
Yeah, well, the South still is what it has been for such a long time. We are the Mexico of the United States.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, but I didn't want to.
Yeah, no, but it's the truth. Yeah. And I can say it.
Yeah.
We're so excited about Toyota coming in. And we've become, as one of the union people say, people come to Alabama and the South because labor is cheap and there's no fear of unions. We are a right to work state, which means we're a union state, a non-union state, which means that we are not in favor of the average worker
Yeah.
in this state.
I just reread When Affirmative Action Was White by Ira Katzen something, and he talks about how the during the New Deal, the South was very unionized, right? The AFL and the CIO went into the South and unionized people, and everybody saw it as a good thing. But then, unionizing the South means giving economic power to black people of the South. And so
white people
and white people, right? Of
for
course,
white people.
But racism is so powerful in America that they would screw the white Southerners just to screw the black Southerners, right? Screw them all,
right?
By deunionizing. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, yes, I do think though that the argument that people will work against their own interests is true, but it's, I grew up in the civil rights movement. I grew up in southwestern Georgia. I was born in 1951. My parents were both civil rights activists.
What did they do? What was their profession? I mean, not what they did in the movement, but
yeah. Well, my mother was a housewife. Basically, she brought Head Start to Albany. Oh, wow. Albany is the first place that Martin Luther King was put in jail. And it's very interesting because it was there that this backwoods Southern sheriff out Gandhi'd King. He understood the tactics of nonviolent resistance, and he didn't allow the jail to get full. He had arrangements with outlying jails. So one of the tactics, if your listeners don't know, is of nonviolent resistance is to fill up the jails. And once you filled up the jails, then you've got all these people out on the street doing what they want to do. So Mama started Head Start, and she was just and Daddy was a lawyer, but he also taught history or political science at the local college. And they were always challenging people, always, always, always. They wouldn't, particularly Daddy would not put up with racist language and that kind of thing. And it was to the degree that they received phone calls threatening the lives of their children, which was me and my little sister, if they didn't stop. And then we moved to Birmingham, and Daddy got a job teaching at Cumberland Law School. So, and I was like, when we moved to Birmingham, I was like, I'm going to get a break. Nobody will know us,
What year was this?
That would have been in 1967.
Okay.
So after the Children's March. But I thought, we'll get a break. And the first thing Daddy does is he gets a radio interview, and he goes on and on about how the Confederate flag needs to come down from the State House in Montgomery. So, I mean, there was no escape. But I grew. Daddy was always going to be Daddy.
It's a character thing, right? I mean,
mm-hmm.
The older I get, the more I realize, like, man, your character, like the Greek said, character is destiny, and you can either fight it. Fighting your character makes you miserable.
Yeah. And so, then I got all these degrees and everything. And I don't know how we got into this, but did you ask me a question?
I must have, but no, I mean, this is part of the show, right? I really want to get to know you and like how you became, Ellin. Ellin. What I mean, this is not the first time I've asked somebody this question. What kind of name is Ellin Jimmerson?
Okay, Ellin, Ellin, is a combination of my mother's name, which was Eleanor, Elinor. Okay. And my father's name, which was Edwin. And so Jimmerson, of course, is my husband's last name.
Okay, Jimmerson is what kind of name?
I mean, we don't know. I thought it was like English or Irish or English or Scottish, but Al remembers his mother saying it was Danish,
Yeah, it
but
sounds something
his
like that.
grandmother does it.
Yeah.
His grandmother looked Sicilian.
Mm.
His and his aunt, like black eyes, dark skin, dark, really curly hair. And so, I mean, could she be Lebanese, Sicilian?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
People come to America and they create a whole new identity, right? They're trying to get away from whatever they left behind or
Yeah.
whatever.
So
Uh,
my middle name is Stern. And so I think this is interesting because it's sort of like it's a story about my family, but it's also a story about the human nature.
yeah.
So the Sterns were Jews in Germany, and the two brothers left Germany after there was a series of democratic revolutions in 1848. And so they left Germany after the revolution of 1848 because that was followed by a series of pogroms or attacks on Jewish people. So they left. They first went to Buffalo, New York, but then soon they moved down to Georgia. And what did they do? They bought some land, they bought some slaves, they put the slave and some sewing machines and put the slaves to work making uniforms for the Confederate soldiers.
Wow.
I mean, it's just like, what?
Yeah.
You did what?
But I mean, they're in a different country, so they don't. I mean, it's weird. Like I had my ex girlfriend. Her mom was Jewish. She was adopted. She was from Korea, but her mom was Jewish, and the family name was Jacobowitz or something like that. So when they came to America, they couldn't have a name like Jacobowitz, so they
Yeah,
changed it to Jackson.
yeah,
Such an
yeah, yeah,
American name, Jackson, and
yeah.
that's her name, Jackson. But
And
getting back to the second cooler, I mean, the
yeah,
second
please
cooler's
tell me the
about
things you
the
like
second
about it.
cooler in Pima County in Arizona, and
Yeah,
I had just read The Devil's Highway. I just read The Land of Open Graves, which is all about Arizona. So
yeah,
the second cooler. Do you want to explain to us why it's called the second cooler?
sure. It refers to the second morgue refrigerator that the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office had to install to house the high number of bodies of migrants that they were recovering from the Sonora Desert, where migrants had been funneled since 1994. And I was interviewing the medical examiner there, um, and he referred to that second refrigerator as the second cooler, and I just thought that was a
I can see it in your
powerful.
face. I can
Yeah,
see in your face what you think. I mean, it's odd. I mean, you think of a cooler as oh, the beers are in the second
weird.
cooler,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but there's bodies in there.
yeah. And that's what it's there for, to keep them cool, so the people who work there can stand to be, I mean, to keep them from decomposing. And
Yeah.
mm,
Um,
it's just,
I
that's what
want to
it.
bring up something, and forgive me if you don't want to talk about it. You can just tell me. In the documentary, you mentioned that your daughter.
Mhm.
Uh, well, do you want to
Sure.
tell what happened to your daughter?
Well, I was literally editing
Right.
the second cooler. I had been, and she went out with her boyfriend, and they were going to movie gallery to get a movie to watch with her cousin, and they were killed. They were hit by an undocumented man who had been drinking. And everybody wanted to focus on the fact that the driver was undocumented and drinking, and nobody wanted to focus on the fact that he was being pursued by a police officer in a high speed chase. So, that was just particularly undocumented people in Huntsville and elsewhere, Atlanta. Um, they they knew of me and knew what had happened. The story it made some of the little Latino papers, that so people as far down as Chile read about it. Um, And there were people here who literally wanted to drag him out and basically hang him, lynch
Yeah.
him,
Right.
settle the score,
Right.
because it got a lot of attention, a lot of press. But people, Latinos here especially, were just devastated. They felt a sense of personal responsibility. And of course, I didn't, they had nothing to do with it. And
Well, that's interesting that you feel that way, because right, I mean, the natural and common response to that would be to look at the bare facts of the case. This person didn't have, quote unquote, didn't have a right to be here, was drinking, and was just killed your daughter, right? But that
and
you were able to see the web that these two little strings were a part of is incredible. Is incredible.
well, yes. I mean, I think maybe having done this work gave me something of a backstory that I would not have. And I had relationships with a lot of people at the church he had gone to as a youth, and I got information that never got into the papers, or into common knowledge, which was that at one place where I was speaking years later, a woman waited for me, a Mexican woman, and said that that Felix Ortega had been with his son, just with her son, hours previously, and that he had diabetes, and he may have had a diabetic episode. But in terms of the police officer, Felix Ortega was headed out of town. He was headed on Memorial Parkway, which runs north to south. He was headed south out, and the policeman was pursued him. So, in order to try to avoid the police officer, he made that fateful left-hand turn and put him on Airport Road, which is heavily congested, and taken him into the heart of where people were.
Wow.
So, I mean, I very much hold him responsible.
Right.
I don't hate his guts or anything
Right.
like that. But, there was one, we hear this a lot with these very gratuitous killings of people like George Floyd and others, that there's this in-house investigation and the officer is found blameless. I'm not saying it happened with George Floyd, but that's sort of the typical story we hear. And that's what happened with her too. And he uttered the magic words, which I later learned from other people who have had similar experiences. He said he backed off. So the fact that he backed off somehow absolved him, even though
Who backed
my
off?
daughter and her boyfriend are dead.
The cop backed off?
That's what he said. But he also said to the reporter, one of the reporters, that he was just so puzzled that the faster he drove pursuing Ortega, the faster Ortega drove.
How is that puzzling? That's
I mean,
logic in my mind.
Well, you get these very, very young officers who basically are not really well experienced in life, and you give them these souped up cars and a badge, and a lot of them, particularly in my area of town, hang around the police station bored out of their minds, just like Border Patrol officers that I've talked to. They're out, I go out there in the Sonora Desert, and go up to a gate with Mike Wilson, and we're suddenly surrounded by Border Patrol, and and they say basically they're bored. They're bored out of their minds, so they're waiting for something to happen, and then you get that adrenaline in there that
And now they got all these like you're saying, souped up cars and equipment. And if you're living I live in Henderson, Nevada, and it's seems pretty slow here, but the equipment that they give the cops is nonetheless really impressive, like SUVs and all this stuff. So
yeah.
And if maybe you're playing video games at home, you want to play the role. You want to be a cowboy, a modern day cowboy with all this technology. Thank you for sharing that, by the way.
Well, you're welcome. It doesn't, she's on my mind 24/7, so it doesn't bother me. And I've talked about it so much, but, and I have very little personal space. So, I can talk about these things, but it offends people when I say that their deaths need to be counted, alongside, not to displace Trayvon Martin, but alongside. And I think because I think you can deal with the problem, the more people you say are affected by this, and then it also applies to white people, to Asians. I mean, this was not the first fatality in Huntsville because of a high speed. It's the system, it's the recklessness. And I have been on the grand jury where the prosecutor was not praising, but was joking with an officer in an encouraging sort of way about, the thrill of being with him when he's engaged in a high-speed chase.
Well, they're all on the same side, right? Police departments
And
work for the system just like the prosecutor does.
Yeah. And so, but it's, people, and I understand why people are offensive, because nobody came after them because they were Black or put their knees on their necks or anything like that. But it's the entire system that tolerates and encourages this kind of recklessness and this kind of hyper masculinity and militarizes them.
Yeah.
And, so, I mean, I think that they should be counted among the lost to our militarized police system.
I'm going to say something that's going to be kind of like a segue into what I want to talk to you next about is theology, Christianity.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's this sense that a death is a loss for the country. Anybody who dies, even if if it's an innocent Black or brown or white person, or if it's a racist, if we kill a racist, that still means there's something wrong with this country, right? That person, that's a life lost, right? And that for whatever reason, it's a loss. And the reason I say that is that I was raised Catholic. I'm an atheist now, but I still consider myself culturally Christian, culturally Catholic even. And I've called myself a Christian atheist anarchist. I believe, and maybe you have degrees in theology, so I think that Jesus was an anarchist. I mean, there's the whole Tolstoy talks about it, or the whole give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God.
That was a trick question.
What was a trick question?
He says to the people, whose face is on the coin?
Right.
And so
Caesar's face.
Caesar's face is on the coin.
Right.
What belongs to Caesar?
The coin, money.
Yes, and what belongs to God? All of that.
Right.
It's a trick question, and that the answer is it all belongs to God. It all belongs to people. Which is
why I think to me that sounds anarchist. I mean, in anarchy, not in like burning down buildings and yada yada. Right. I'm talking about anarchy in individual rights and community of individuals.
Right. And not having this, I mean, yes, I completely see that and have no disagreement. I agree with it. Of course, it depends on how you define all these things.
Right.
But I think the central theme of the Bible and what I've studied, I went to divinity school because I had become interested in liberation theology as it comes out of Latin America.
You described liberation theology as reading the Bible through the lens of oppressed peoples and looking at oppressed peoples through the lens of the Bible.
Yeah.
Which I think, I mean, is that how you would just in a nutshell explain, I know about liberation theology just through learning about history in Latin America, right, especially, but explain what liberation theology is.
Just that. It has to do with, and so the central theme of the Bible, according to the liberation, which is also a good historical reading of the Bible. If you read historians like Richard Horsley, it begins to make a lot of sense. But the central theme of the Bible is that God is not Pharaoh. God is not Caesar. God is not the kings. They do not coterminate in this one place, that this is a lie, that God is opposed to Pharaoh, hence the parting of the waters at the Red Sea. God is opposed to Caesar, hence the resurrection. And I think a lot of people who are so culturally Western and we're so
Or culturally Catholic or Christian, you know, Father in heaven, Father in your family, Father in the church, government is the Father, right?
yeah,
You know,
right. And so, wherever you find oppression, you're finding not God, according to the Bible. Now, that doesn't mean that Jesus was a feminist. I mean, that's just so out of historical context. But I think if you look at, say, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Nicaragua, of course, is a machista society. It was and still remains. But you've got women who who commanded one or two of the fronts.
Yeah.
Where the action was taking place, they were commanding it. And this is not unusual, So I think if you, so I read about Nicaragua, which is about what I've read the most, and I've also published on that. So I go back and I, read about Mary and Martha and all of this, and I'm thinking about these women whose names I've forgotten, leading these fronts, and people say, well, Jesus must have been a feminist. He was polite. He talked to women and all this. And I'm like, I think you're missing something. I think you're missing that, like Mary, the Magnificat, was saying, we're done. We're done with your power. We're done with your killing. We're done with you taking our young men. All of these kinds of things. We're done. We're not going to have it anymore. We're going to overturn you. And so, I look at Nicaragua and I say, well, yeah, that's who Mary was.
Yeah.
But it wasn't clear to me until I was reading Latin American history, Nicaragua in particular, and reading Ernesto Cardenal's, who was a liberation theologian who just recently died, reading how he works back and forth with the Bible and revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, he would say that Christ, the very appearance of Christ in Jesus of Nazareth, was an evolutionary event. It was part of the evolution of people into full humanity.
The new human being.
Human, like who said that?
Well, I mean, Che has a book called The New Man in Cuba.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Che Guevara and Jose Marti.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe. So it was all this part of evolution. So Ernesto Cardenal, who was just brilliant, would see Big Bang and the Big Bang Theory as reinforcing the idea of the Christ event, not contradicting it, but reinforcing it, because this is all part of God's approach to the world, that it was explosive. He does an awful lot of interesting things with pregnancy and birth, that Nicaragua, during the revolution, was in the birth pangs of a new birth. They were bringing the fullness of humanity into being, where Nicaraguan men could actually live beyond the age of 16 or 17. Girls were not being raped by the National Guard. This was an evolution. So you come back to Mary in her pregnancy, Elizabeth. You come back to the woman who faces the dragon in the book of Revelation, and the dragon pursues her into the desert. I mean, how can I, having read and really been affected by all of that, not see some of that happening in the Sonora Desert, where you've got, a woman who's pregnant,
yeah,
giving birth to the revolution, which is a lot of what migrants are doing, and
fleeing the slaughter of the innocents, and they're looking for a new sanctuary, in a foreign land.
To be alive, not because they want a washing machine, not because you breathe the free air in the United States, but because they want to be alive. They want their children to be alive and not be walking in death all the time.
I mean, yeah, this is just it's for me. I mean, I've read the Bible a few times, you know, the King James, but I don't. I mean, what? So as a Christian, as a Baptist, Baptist is what? Baptist means. Explain what Baptist means. Does it mean that you don't you don't you know in Baptist you accept Christ at a responsible age, like how Mormons do, maybe?
Yes, yes. That you have Baptists make a decision,
Which is
and so
good.
it's very important to
You're not born into it. You're not, you
no,
know. Yeah,
it's on you. It's totally on you. Although
yeah.
I have a problem when the person is 7 years old or 6 years old. There's so much pressure there. But my girls didn't make a profession of faith until they were teenagers.
How did you know, as a Baptist minister, how did you address faith with your kids when they were younger?
Not much.
Yeah, me
We
neither.
just we were in church, all the time. They were in the youth programs. They were in choir. I was teaching. It was just part of life.
Yeah.
Which is part of life. But what Baptists have are four. They're called Baptist distinctives. One is the authority of the Bible alone. In other words, there's no priest, there's no pastor, there's nobody who can get in your head and tell you how you should believe. This is on paper, this is theoretically. The autonomy of the local church, the priesthood of all believers, and something else.
And that's
Um,
from the Bible too, right? I mean, Jesus says, don't be like those people who want to be seen, praying in church. Wherever you kneel and pray, God is listening to you.
yeah, 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 exactly. So, I mean, it's so odd that the Baptists have come where they've come because I actually believed those things and I believed other people believed them.
Yeah.
But I found differently when I officiated at the first legal same sex wedding in Madison County, Alabama, wherever it was, and was very surprised when people turned on me. It wasn't so much that I had officiated at the wedding, it was that it got so much publicity. And there was an assumption people made that the whole church agreed with me. And in fact, Baptists don't agree with each other. But I thought that was okay. But we were actually disfellowshipped. We were kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Wow.
So, and I haven't been active since. It was so hurtful.
I just got done rereading Baldwin's the Fire Next Time, and he talks about he became a minister when he was 14, and he knew the whole time he was faking it. Kind of like, I don't know if you saw, I'm sure you did. You saw how Mother Teresa said that she hadn't felt the Spirit in her life for the past 50 years. Even when
Yeah.
she gave communion,
Mhm.
she felt a void there.
Yeah.
And he describes church as full of hate,
Yeah.
self-hate, and fear. And maybe not as a Baptist, but as a Catholic, I
Yeah.
gotta say, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of you find
Judgment.
that the people that smile at you at church on Sunday are
Yeah.
not really your friend, or don't really want you to be who you are. Really, they want you
No.
to be who they want you to be.
And what was so odd to me is that we had several younger people in the church who were gay and out. And nobody had a problem with them working with the youth in Vacation Bible School. But it was their parents who were some of the hardest on me. Now, they love their kids, and on paper, they're not homophobic and they're not. People are
Well, you said
complicated,
you said they love their kids, and as
but they
you're a
didn't love me.
parent, and you're saying that as a parent that you love your kids. I'm not saying that you don't love your kids, but
Yeah.
Bell Hooks says that there's no such thing as unconditional love, not even between a
Yeah.
parent and a child. That
Yeah.
loving is what you actively do. And if there
Yeah.
are people who don't know how to love, and they have kids and they don't know how to love their kids.
Well, the South, the Baptist Church, and I think Huntsville being an engineer town, it's a very much a conformist place where people don't want attention paid to them.
The fear of being seen is so funny.
The fear of being seen. Yes, that's it. It's like people started looking at us, Ellin. They started looking at us.
They're looking at us.
Everything we could to keep people away for 50 years.
And what is that? Is that the self-hate? Is that the insecurity? You don't want to be seen?
Yeah.
Your flaws, your beautifulness, the beautiful part of you, and your flaws and everything. I'm a human being. Look at me. Yeah, it must be that. You don't think people are going to accept you when you haven't accepted yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of that. And I didn't see it. I mean, these are the same people who ordained me.
Yeah.
That when I went before the deacons, they said, "What took you so long?"
Yeah.
We've been waiting for you to ask.
Well, there's so many Christians you find that they know the Bible and they listen to the sermons, but they don't really, doesn't sink in. This is about you, your soul, your life, your mind.
They think you're one of us, and that kind of thing, and then you do this thing. I mean, I could have married a black man. Yeah. Assuming I was looking, and nobody would have said anything about that. Despite the fact that we are a segregated church, in fact. Yeah. Because the neighborhood is in fact segregated. But I don't know. I find people very perplexing.
And to move to that, I mean, I wanted to talk about your book. What was the book called? Rainbow
in the Word.
I have not read it yet. I just saw it this morning, and I will read it. It's a collection of accounts from LGBT Christians talking about their Christian faith, which sounds amazing.
Well, I think it's better than that, because what they do is write about their experiences and seeing themselves in characters in the Bible. And for example,
Jesus for one, maybe. I mean, he wasn't married. I'm not saying I'm joking, but there's if you're looking for examples, somebody might suspect, why wasn't Jesus married? Why wasn't Jesus married? If it's a sacrament, especially.
Yeah, well, Jeff Hood, he and I are sort of on the same plane. He's also a Baptist minister, but he grew up in a much different home environment than I did. Very restrictive, very judgmental, all this kind of thing. And he, flipped out of that. So his essay, which is the first one in the book, is called, I think, is God is Queer. And he's the most theological of the writers, just talking in theological terms. But he says, look, God is just weird. God is not us. God is not man. God is not woman. God is queer.
Beyond our comprehension.
God is weird is all get out. God loves us, even though God loves Trump, come on.
God loves Trump.
How hard is that? Yeah.
God loves the racist. God loves the murderer, the slaughterer.
And that's queer. That's so weird. Yeah. But other people were like, one of the people the person who inspired the book has since gone on to divinity school himself, but he's always been very, or for a long time, sort of hopelessly Christian. And he had this very affirming a church in Vancouver. And he talks about, he's also HIV positive. And as are so many men of his age in the who are in their 50s and above, gay men.
Right.
Almost every gay man I know who's 50 or above is HIV positive.
Well, in the late
So
70s, early 80s, I mean, it was going around and nobody really knew about it at the time
no,
until what, the late mid 80s afterward.
well, and all there were gay bars, and I mean, there was no gay church, and no,
No
So
safe sex
anyway,
for sure.
yeah,
Not in
I
the
mean,
70s, I hear.
yeah, yeah. So he writes about. So he was living in San Francisco at the height of the pandemic, and he's very good looking, and he said he was always so proud of being good looking, and he would always check out the good looking guys and want to get to know them in a bar and all this. And he was on the metro in San Francisco, and a man got on board that obviously was dying of AIDS, and he just recoiled. He didn't want to be that ugly, that sick, that needy, and so he what he saw in that was Lazarus coming up out of the tomb, Lazarus filled with sores that nobody wanted to touch. And so he saw the hypocrisy in himself, and he saw that man as Lazarus. So the essays are about people reading themselves as gay or queer in these characters in the Bible. They see themselves in it. It's not about, does the Bible support or condemn homosexuality? I mean, it's a given for all of us that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And we don't get into that, or the writers. So I'm the only straight person involved with the book.
Well, I mean, it's funny that, people, when they want to come down on homosexuality, they'll go to Leviticus or Deuteronomy.
Mm-hmm.
When Jesus came,
yeah.
When Jesus came, it was a revolution. It's to get away, to tear down the temple. I'm not bringing peace, I'm bringing a sword.
Yeah.
But it's, is it a, we have to admit too that most people don't have good, strong reading skills, and to be able to digest the Bible, you need to be a really good reader.
Yes. And it would be very helpful if things like our history was actually taught in the schools, the history of the United States.
Oh, for sure.
All these kinds of things.
But even as an atheist, I say that we should, maybe an English class in high school or something, teach the Bible just
Mm-hmm.
as a document, right? As a, obviously there's Christians who are going to, even if there's Christian kids, they'll get something out of it of actually reading it.
Yes,
and going through it.
The Bible, read the Quran, read the Torah.
Yeah.
And some of the the rabbinic
Text,
commentary. Yeah.
Maimonides and all those, yeah.
How can you not? So, you say you're an atheist, which is fine. And it's kind of interesting that you say that. And one of the things that I think we're on so much of a common wavelength about is, on paper, I'm not an atheist. I'm a theist.
Right.
And I believe in God. But to me, the question of the existence of God is an issue I have no interest in.
Yeah.
So
no, I don't either. I mean, I did it as a young man, in my late teens, early 20s. You're rebelling against everything, and who better to rebel against than God, right? The idea of God.
To me, the only issue is, what kind of God is God?
Right.
It's like middle C on the piano. That's the starting point, or first position in ballet.
Yeah.
You've got to have a starting point. So God is a starting point.
Right.
For then getting into, who is this God? This God is the one who says Caesar has got to go.
Yeah. I mean, I call myself a Christian anarchist, atheist, because, the way I live my life is that if there is a God, this is the God I believe in, that I'm trying to live my life and be as good as a person as I can in my everyday life. Every day is a struggle to be good, to do the right thing, to make the right choices. And by the time I die, if there is a God, he better let me in. I mean, I don't, you know what I mean? Like
it'll be a sad thing if he doesn't, or if
he says that, oh, you don't, because you didn't believe in me, then, I mean, if your child doesn't believe in you, you still love them.
you could say, I don't believe you're my mother.
Yeah.
I think I got exchanged in the hospital by mistake.
Right.
Okay.
I'm still gonna make you dinner. I'm still gonna take care of you when you're sick. I'm still
buy you new shoes.
Exactly. That's the God I believe in, who doesn't care whether I believe in him or not. He's not that, he or she or it is not that petty,
Right. What God cares about is the national security state. And that's all in it. It's all in it. The military is always showing up. There's a reason why it was a centurion who said, surely this man is the Son of God.
Right.
Because Caesar was making that claim that he was the Son of God. And Jesus, these are counter Caesar, counter imperial statements. I am the Son of God, and so there's a reason why the centurion, and here's a fun fact. The centurion in the Roman Empire was the only way somebody could rise from the lowest level of the empire all the way to being Caesar. Right. Being a centurion was a pathway to empire.
So Martius, right? Martius in the 200 BC, he reformed the laws because before that you had to have land to be in the legion. But after that, no, they opened it up to the plebes, and you can rise up. There's a funny story about you. You obviously you remember the John Wayne played that centurion, right? Where he says, "Surely this must be the Son of God." And the director, I don't know who it was, maybe John Ford or somebody, said, "Oh, Mr. Wayne, say it with more awe." So he goes, "Aw, surely this must be the Son of God." It's a true story, supposedly.
That's funny. That's so funny. I hadn't heard that.
Well, Ellin, it was really great talking to you. Really great to know you after so many years of talking to you through Facebook and social media. Let everybody know how they can find you and find your work and what you're up to.
Well, you can find me on Facebook. I do have a website, but it's currently under construction, so it's down. But it'll be back. I have a blog, Ellin Jimmerson blog. I don't blog much, but basically you can find me on Facebook. And you need to watch my movie, which I'm giving away for free during the pandemic. If I can get your email address, I will send it to you. And I'd love for everybody to pick up a copy of Rainbow in the Word, especially I think if you're interested in the subject of the Bible and gay people, please read it. Read what gay people have to say about being Christians. And I think you'll find that it could be that gay people are the future of the church because they actually find something they need.
Well, isn't Christianity about the least of these, right?
Well, that's what they say.
That's what they say. Yeah. And I want to say that, anybody listening to watching this, you are what we think, what we hope when we say Christian. That's what we hope people are, right? And so for so long and in too many instances, it's not that, right? Yeah. It's somebody who's judgmental and somebody who's a hypocrite and everything you're not supposed to be as a Christian.
Yeah.
But you are a good Christian. By all accounts. So we'll find out. We'll keep watching and following you. But thank you so much. The audio will be out later today, and the video will be up on YouTube tomorrow. I'll send you the links.
Okay, good. Thank you. And I will advertise. This has been too much fun.
Yeah. I got to bring you back on. We could have gone. We touched on a few things. I wanted to give the audience, a sense of who you are in a nutshell. But there's a lot there to go into.
Well, if we do this again, I would love to talk about filmmaking.
Oof. Because it's interesting that was your first documentary. And you had no idea that you were going to do a documentary, right?
No, I don't even take pictures of my kids,
Yeah, you said that, and I was like, because I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, I got to ask her. Like, I would love to, be her production assistant and stuff like that. And then when I saw that interview, I don't know what I was doing either. So I was like, oh, wow. That's a lesson just to do it, right? Just to do it. Don't be afraid. Just do it. Figure it out along the way.
I would like to talk about where we as filmmakers are in terms of the idea of nothing about us without us, and who gets to tell whose stories and those kinds of things.
I'll bring you back on. We'll discuss. We'll dedicate a whole hour to that because that sounds so.
I'd love it. All right.
Thank you so much. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Hope you're holding
All
up
right.
okay in these troubling times.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen with the election? I got to ask. We're so close.
What?
What do you think is going to happen with the election? I think Trump's going to win.
I think Trump is going to win.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to see Biden win just because Trump really is scary. But I mean, we're talking about two sides of the same coin in far too many respects. So,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think Trump will win. I mean,
I think he will win. I don't see the excitement behind Biden. Trump's people are fired up, and that's what you need to win an election. You need people who.
Yeah. So you got.
Your dog agrees. He sounds like a Trump supporter, by the way. He's so fired up. Take care.
All right. You too. Bye bye.
See ya.